Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the beginner's guide. At the end of the last recording I said I would talk about a story and then left it hanging, so I'll finish that now. I wanted to mention, as we're looking at all these games, and I'm calling them garbage games because garbage is pretty much how I describe them, there's an important point to mention that there was at least one company in Japan that embraced the idea of making what they called shiza games, which I think translates to shit games. Um, and what they were doing is they were making games for like the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, that they knew the graphics weren't going to be very good and that there wasn't going to be a lot of polish on it. It was going to be pretty low polygon even for the time. Most notably, the Oni-Chanbara series is the most recognizable of that series, and Oni-Chanbara as a game isn't really that poopy. There was way worse games, but that's not what I'm talking about. So I wanted to make that distinction, because in those cases you had entire production companies that said they knew they didn't have the budget to make good games, but knew they could make some profits just selling anything on the PlayStation 2, because the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1 was wildly popular, particularly in Japan. So they set their goals very low. Coda, as a developer, could have embraced that idea, certainly, and tried to set their goals a lot lower, but have a finished product. Oni-Chanbara is a finished product. It has characters, it has storylines, there's actual levels. It's not hugely good or in depth, but it created a concept and a fandom big enough that there is relevancy to still talk about the Oni-Chanbara series. In fact, I think there is even a slight hope that the Oni-Chanbara series might get remade and rebooted, although who knows if a bikini-clad vampire samurai girl would be allowed as the main character these days, as censorship has pushed towards more mainstreaming of characters and more family-friendly concepts. But that's not what Coda's games are. Like, his vertical slices of games are missing entire layers. As I said in a previous example, he just doesn't have characters, he doesn't have gameplay mechanics, he doesn't have a narrative or any storyline that is outside of perhaps Coda complaining about not having ideas. Like, inherently, he doesn't have ideas. Which, at a certain point, maybe he should just admit that and realize he's not a creative person. And that he should steal and borrow other people's ideas more and polish them and make them something more. Like, I don't think the Harry Potter books are worse than the Harry Potter movies, but by taking the better books and making slightly worse movies, you were able to Warner Brothers was able to make it much more accessible for people to see Harry Potter and see the world of Harry Potter instead of having to imagine it, because there's a lot of people without imagination. Now, of course, that was done by Warner Brothers licensing the Harry Potter books, not just stealing the concept. But at a certain level, when you get outside of the legality of it, there almost certainly were less creative and almost completely not creative people that worked on the Harry Potter movies that were able to take what they were good at and make it a more accessible, possibly better experience for a lot of people. A lot of kids don't like to read, for instance, so I imagine there's at least a tenfold difference between the number of kids who have seen the Harry Potter movies versus kids who have seen or read all the Harry Potter books. Let's continue to the machine here. And that's just from, that's in Coda's case, where I think he could have probably excelled very well, is he could have said, I am not good at taking a narrative. Man, I'm glad to see you arrive safely. We've captured the machine. It's waiting for you now. We can begin the interrogation whenever you like. It's interesting that they make you a female character here when Coda himself is described as male. Interesting that there's a little grip here. Yeah, Coda is good at like texture layout and design. He's getting better at that. So he should really just focus on that. He has not gotten any better with characters models. We're just back to the gray people with blocks on their heads, and the blocks really haven't even improved. Well, the doorway is improved somewhat. He's not even really much of a detailed person. He is a level layout designer more than a texture animator. He is basically a first pass of a level layout designer, even at that, because there's often never anything creative or interesting as far as the hallways you go down. There's not an interesting twist with some alcove to look at and see something different. There's not a little bit of art on the wall. There's not flames or torches on the wall or anything. So he really comes off as just a not creative person that could certainly do that first pass of a level design where you need 30 levels for some first person shooter game in Source Engine. You put them out real quick, you hand that template to your second pass developers who go, okay, now we have a general layout, let's cut and paste and move all of this stuff around, let's make it more interesting, let's have our animators put some sconces on the wall and some textures, some blood splatter, some bullet holes, things like that. Even artistically, the textures that Coda uses don't really complement each other particularly well. It's a cruel thing to say, but honestly, if I was a producer and director, I'd probably fire Coda, and that would probably be the best thing you could ever do for him, is just fire him, crush him early, so he gets out of the game industry and does something completely different, because he definitely has not improved over these years looking at these games. I intend to be quick, I intend to be quiet, I intend to be brutal. Let's go with quick. Very good. And again, you're back to the gray text. Just be warned that someone called the press, so we might have to a bit of attention on this one. Also, one more thing. I didn't see that last piece of dialogue. I didn't read it fast enough. Yeah. In a lot of ways, it almost feels like he's trying to do something like Pink Floyd's The Wall without any of the music of Pink Floyd's The Wall or the movie aspects of Pink Floyd's The Wall. Of course, when you think about Pink Floyd's The Wall, it's a highly personal story that really works if you understand the elements of and the times that Pink the character is living in. It doesn't even make sense so much as a story in modern times. Like growing up during World War II and Margaret Thatchwood running the UK is not that relatable to most people these days. So we have a whole bunch of press. Again, this almost implies that Coda, if this was related to a real world experience, this implies that Coda did have some level of success in the game development world, and then is being overwhelmed by the press again, or interacting with people. It's interesting that you have these grayed out, low polygon shapes of microphones and cameras and boom mics being held not in the air. I can't even really read all of this. I don't think it really matters so much. Looking though again at the actual building in the room here, it's just not particularly well done. I do have some sympathy, certainly. There's a hallway down that way. That's slightly interesting. This all kind of has almost like a Silent Hill vibe. There's a hallway down that way too. It's probably just the same hallways copied. It's an interesting trick here to certainly have people blocking your vision. Yeah, I do have some sympathy for people who made like the first Resident Evil, the team that made the first Silent Hill, the second Silent Hill. Those were very different teams compared to other teams that were handed those franchises, and there are definitely some developers out there that have made like one very successful game. The creator of the Stanley Parable, pretty much only known for making the Stanley Parable, and then getting trapped in their own success and not able to make anything less than a perfect game in the future, which paralyzes them with anxiety and fear. But yeah, at a certain level you just have to be willing to fail and have the confidence and realize you have the respect and support of your company to fail in your next endeavor, because almost certainly the next game after a successful game is going to not be as good. Or you just retire and say, well, I've made my one Mona Lisa, let's not do that. Although notably the Mona Lisa I think took decades to paint and is probably not the last painting from the painter that made the Mona Lisa. It was just the one that was most revered and kept for the longest amount of time, so we remember it more. We have an actual machine here, and these are new textures and different types of doors. And these are different types of walls.
And of course, it's the machine.
This is a nice beginning of a machine. You have basically no texture at all on these boxes here. It's all just in shadow, or no texture at all on that side. So we only have one choice, so we'll say you stopped. You stopped feeding us. Your work was keeping us alive. Your work was keeping us healthy. So maybe the idea is that in the previous game, the machine was freed, but not really, because they said the machine had already, and the ideas had already run out. Let's go with you stop feeding us. Even if he was feeding you nothing of good value. Those people out there, can you imagine what pain you've put them through? It's only because of your creations that any of us could make it through every day. How could we possibly go back to trusting you to do this job? It's basically Coda talking to Coda's own imagination and own brain here. But there is this disconnect and this dishonesty in this, because the narrator's implying heavily and directly saying that Coda never put any of his games on the internet, never showed it to anybody. So the people out there are really just Coda being feeded from his own creations and nobody else. Notably here, nothing is changing with each line of dialogue, which if you were going to go with that concept of the previous game, you would have had that happen. And because he's never learned to have a black outline around the text or a black background, or at least a gray out background, it's really difficult to read the choices. It's also having your eye jump to the lower right side of the screen for no reason, when really you should just have 3 prompts either at the very bottom centered or maybe slightly higher, more like the Telltale layout, which I imagine by this point Telltale games would have been out, so you would have seen that layout and could have stolen it as an idea. It's only because of your creations that any of us could make it through every day. Let's go with that, because that's how I feel Coda feels. But you're just talking to a machine and it's not going to respond. So here's what needs to happen. You need to go to the people who are out there and apologize to them. You need to admit to the people that you allowed them to suffer. I've been so alone. Inherently, every human allows other humans to suffer. You can't control the world, you're not a god. So, feeling bad about that is not really worth it. Not really something you should concern yourself with. At a certain level, yes, if you see someone drowning and you let them drown and you could have saved them, that's one thing. But if someone's drowning across the planet 10,000 miles away, there was nothing you could do and nothing you were expected to have done. I'm going to go with 3. I've been so alone. That seems to be the truer response. Apologize for leaving me. Personally, I don't understand why people always want apologies for things. Very rarely do you get a sincere apology, particularly almost never if you're asking for an apology, and it really doesn't accomplish anything. You're working on a lot of faith that the apology is true. You're working on a lot of faith that the person has changed their feelings, thoughts, beliefs, or ideas, and that they wouldn't do it again. Almost certainly they would do it again, and maybe just not get caught the next time for whatever they're supposed to apologize for. I find it, particularly in business, a horrible idea to apologize for anything, and you should never apologize for anything, and you should print out emails and document if anybody apologizes to you for anything to use later in some of the Machiavellian style corporate politics that often appear when you start to have trouble with a job. You have to be kind of sneakier than you probably would want to, or would realize you might have to, because those things do sometimes just pop up, and you would one day you think everybody's a big happy family at the job, and the next day somebody is trying to document 6 months of inferior performance and fire you, just because they have to meet some budget, and they're just trying to lie and get rid of you, or get rid of a bunch of people. But since we have only one option as far as apologize for leaving me, we'll just click it. Thing can't talk, though, seemingly. So why ask for an apology? Know nothing, think carefully. I know how to hurt you. I've seen the thing you fear. See, seems like now he's just gonna hurt himself because the machine can't talk. We'll go know nothing and try to avoid. Alright then, I will apologize to the people on your behalf. Okay. On a certain level, maybe Coda could be the boss. I don't see how that would really be the case. Like, a lot of these scenarios that are possibilities only make sense if you ignore a lot of what we've been shown and told to fit a different narrative. And you would have to assume just that a lot of unreliable narration had happened. It would be an interesting twist, but it's probably not the case if the machine is actually the narrator, the writer, the creator of the Stanley Parable, the writer of the Stanley Parable, and Coda is actually more the CEO, person in charge of the company, the developer, the publisher of the Stanley Parable. If that was the case, then that would be an interesting twist if Coda was actually highly successful and then just making these crap games as a way of trying to be like one of the boys, like one of the game developers, but he just somehow skipped over the point in which he actually could have been part of the team and is instead just the boss. It's somewhat believable. I mean, that some childish, immature, emotionally disconnected person just came from a bunch of money and invested into a writer and a development team to make a video game, and desperately wanted to be turn that video game company into a group of friends, but was completely incapable of actually succeeding at that. Here we have a very nice big area. It's a lot of copy and pasting, certainly, but for the brutal-esque architectural style, I believe that's the architectural style I'm trying to reference. This isn't completely unbelievable that there would be something like this somewhere in the world. Let's see. And this does feel very reminiscent of something like Pink Floyd's The Wall. But if I was to start to think about the entirety of this game and think if it was just a one-for-one ripoff of Pink Floyd's The Wall, I would have recognized more aspects. Certainly, there would have been a lot more drugs, a lot more violence. So, yeah, my followers, my friends, if you're apologizing on his behalf, it doesn't really matter what you pick. I guess the question is, how honest do you want to be? Do you want to say you have friends when you really don't? Or do you want to say followers because you have followers? Again, it feels like there might have been a fairly large jump between the last 7 months where maybe the Stanley Parable actually came out and people were hyped about it at this point. But even that doesn't really make sense. If anything, it almost feels like several of these games would have had to have been made after the Stanley Parable came out, if the story is connected at all, which it maybe isn't. If anything, this all may just be carefully plotted out as a narrative to make you make assumptions that are completely wrong, and there is no coda. The narrator's not really it. I like kind of the handles and the textures here. Visually, this is getting better and better. So if this was a Source Engine game, I'd believe it, but it does look nicer. Every now and then, things start to look a little nicer, but never that great. And there's just like no real gameplay here. Like if there was a bunch of zombies in these areas and you had to kill them, that might work. But you're not going to race go-karts through an area like this. You're not going to parkour between building sections that are this repetitive. There's no random like breakage of windows or damage. So interacting with that is probably not going to happen. Whereas if you were able to climb walls and jump from window to window, you'd expect there to be certain ones that are boarded up or broken. Yeah, it doesn't have to be zombies. You could just be Counter-Strike Global Offensive style military shooting experiences here. But this is also kind of an area that not much would happen here for very long. You just run from one entrance to the other. Alright, let's go with my followers. Notice it's all capitalized. So the ownership is an aspect certainly think about. This time the boom mic is being held upward. A lot of people though not really taking pictures, instead holding the camera more down towards their belt, looking at the camera, I would assume. I have a troubling revelation. Let's go with that. The machine will not apologize to us. The machine refuses to admit that it deliberately hurt us. Let's go. The machine will not apologize to us. I don't think it can. But this is not important. We are stronger than it thinks we are. We will find to live without it. We do not need its games. Let's go with that one. Let us pay it retribution. Let us show it that we are not failures. Let's go with that one. And again, we're just back to dialogue and text. Like, he doesn't want to make games, Coda. He wants to tell stories. He wants to make choose-your-own-adventure books or visual novels, which perhaps, if Coda was more of an Asian developer, he would be more familiar with visual novels and it would make more sense. But I don't even think he really wants to make visual novels as much as he wants to make novels. And he's not really saying anything, so he couldn't really make novels either. So he is making short stories at best. And that certainly would make sense if the narrator of this game is the writer of the Stanley Parable, and he just wrote the game and didn't program it and didn't have any skill in programming it. And if Coda is also the narrator and the writer, it would totally make sense why these games are as bad as they are. A writer would not have time or skill to make a game that's an interactive experience, and would just be trying to tell short stories, and that seems to be it. Follow me, we will destroy the machine, we will destroy everything the machine has created. I guess we'll go with one. At a certain point, I suspect that killing a person is not as bad as killing a person and his children and everything he's ever created ever, which, if that is the equivalent, at a certain level this is potentially a form of mental self-suicide. So let's go with one and destroy the machine. If something must be destroyed, save the creations. And it looks like we're going back to the theater now, not towards the machine. We keep jumping between these different themes, even when these themes are introduced fairly late in the presentations. This is a different depiction of a theater because there was that dark red carpet before. And
remember, you can click to fire the gun.
I've often thought it would have been interesting to see a game where you destroyed the entire destructible environment. I don't think you get very far on that concept. They were very hyped around destructible environments about 10 years ago, 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago. Who knows when, actually. But just being able to potentially destroy an environment and end up in a white box otherwise is an art piece more than it is a real world experience. And notably, you don't have the option to not pull the trigger, because if there was that option, we would have taken it. And click to fire the gun in this case means press A. Notice how we are Coda, I'll make sure your work dies here. Coda, I'll make sure you're known forever.
Now the work is becoming self-destructive. And I'll tell you, at the time that I first played this game, shortly after he made it, here's what I'm thinking to myself. I'm thinking that Code is stuck in his own head, and that it's having a very negative effect on him,
Doesn't destroy the floor.
All he needs to do is just start showing his work to people, to get some actual feedback on his games. It might get him out of isolation. And so, as I'm thinking this, I realize that I could be the one to initiate it. Because it would never occur to Coda to start actively soliciting feedback, so what if I did it for it? If he could see the difference it would make to have more actual conversations with other human beings,
typewriters one by one get destroyed if you hit them,
would it give him confidence in himself?
Otherwise it destroys the floor. This is back to the idea, certainly. What if Coda was just a character, a Andy Kaufman-esque character that was pretending to be crazy?
So I started showing Coda's work to people. I took this one, and the islands which you just played, the theater, the notes, the house cleaning game, and some of the prison escape games. I brought them to people that I knew and trusted. I asked their opinions. And the great part is that they really loved his games. You know, the point of it all was just to give him some external reference point, but they genuinely loved his work. There was nothing for him to be afraid of.
Question is, did he show the games as his own? And the bigger question is, why would people like his games? Like, why? I imagine people would just being nice. I don't feel like you would get a full put down your weapon. I don't feel like you're getting a full response. 1, 2, 3 as choices don't seem to be options. Yeah, I feel like if the narrator showed Coda's games to people, people would have just been nice and said, yeah, we really like these, out of kindness. But if you would have showed to a publisher, I don't think you get budgets from that, or even get to the first part of negotiating contracts for actually developing a project. At a certain level, showing a demo of a game to people is very different from making a game pitch. And inherently, if the narrator was acting like he was making a game pitch using Coda's material, whether or not he was representing himself as being Coda, it doesn't even matter. He almost certainly would have gotten a negative response. Probably a very soft negative response where people just don't comment or respond. Because, like, I've seen Game Jam games, and these aren't even particularly good in game jams. And if he was doing game jams, which they did say at least one of these was a game jam game, then he would have been getting some kind of awards, acknowledgement, and feedback there, which just once again makes the story feel like it's not true. It more and more feels like this is a story of a false narrative in which the writer of the Stanley Parable stole something from somebody and is now depicting it in a false narrative like he had to, or he should have, or he had the moral right to steal the creations. And at a certain level, he doesn't have the right to show someone else's creation to society. In most people's opinion, like I don't know if I can really agree with the idea that society must be shown every idea and every creation that's ever made. I think people have the right to make something and lock it in their brain, have a thought, have an idea, lock it in their brain, lock it on their computer, delete it after the fact, and not show it to anyone else if they don't choose to. I think the right to privacy as a concept, to stay away from like constitutional amendments, the idea and the right to privacy has to trump any benefit to society, no matter what. Like if there was a scientist, say Oppenheimer, who figured out how to make the atomic bomb, with a team of other scientists, like if Oppenheimer had those ideas and locked them in his head, but there was some kind of technology or machine that could rip it out of his head, would it be morally correct to rip it out of his head to create the atomic bomb? When it's the atomic bomb, most people would probably say no, even though Oppenheimer probably helped produce atomic energy and electricity generation from that also. But let's say it wasn't Oppenheimer. Let's say it was the first person who figured out how to farm using agricultural or modern agricultural things. They figured out that watering the fields at certain times improved the result of food. That idea certainly would have benefited society and did benefit society a huge amount. But does that give society the right to steal the idea, use some magical machine to steal it from the brain of somebody if they didn't want to share it? And I don't think it does in either case or any case. I think you have a right to privacy. You have a right to abandon your own ideas, or at the very least do with your own ideas and your own creations what you want to do with it. This is a violation. It's as much a violation as if the narrator had gone into Coda's bedroom, taken out his personal private diary, and then published it on the internet for everybody to see. That's a very clear case of why that's wrong and what this is. What the narrator has done is wrong. Even if he didn't steal the ideas, he violated privacy, and privacy is an important thing that we often have to protect as it becomes less and less focused on. Well, it seems like I don't have any other choice but to shoot the machine. The
Can you see
particle
why I felt like this was the right
physics
thing to do? Because it's the thing that I always feel like I need, to be told that my work is good, that I am good. When someone really connects with a thing that I've made, when they see themselves purely in my work, there's nothing that feels better. And I got to give that very same feeling to my friend. I did something, I really felt like I'd done something good, like I was a good person. I felt like there was a friend who was in trouble and was unhappy and maybe didn't like themselves, and I could fix it. If I could give him this gift, maybe I could fix the problem. When they told me how much they enjoyed his games, it was the best feeling. It was the absolute best feeling. It made me feel so happy. So beautifully, beautifully happy.
Notice I only shot a little bit and didn't destroy the thing, just saw lightning bolts.
So anyway, Coda finishes this game, and then really he just kind of takes off for a while. So this is June of 2011, and I didn't hear anything from him for several weeks, I guess. And so out of nowhere, one day I get an email, and it's got a private link to a new game of Coda's. This one is called The Tower, and to my knowledge, it's the last game that Coda ever made. So let's take a look.
Notice that's in the past tense. So, the tower, by the way, in tarot cards is the symbol of destruction. So that might be a bit of a hint, too. In the same way that Coda is, I believe, the final song in a series of songs or a final piece of text in a book. I never did look up what Coda actually meant. I probably should. But yeah, I imagine it's very possible that some people wouldn't realize how bad of a friend the narrator has been by violating his privacy. In a lot of ways, he's been a bad friend from the beginning, but I do feel like that's the case. There definitely were some reviewers that I heard talking about this game while still trying not to spoil the story that said that this game was potentially a downright confession. Oddly, there's never been a lawsuit, so maybe Coda actually did die if Coda ever actually existed in the first place. But yeah, it definitely seems like this is coming off a lot like a confession. Very rarely do you have any kind of art or creation that is literally just a confession of doing something wrong. It's not a terrible way to start a narrative too, though. If, say, the Odyssey had been a confession of all the wrongdoings of the main characters, instead of just being an adventure, that would have definitely been a different story. But yeah, it definitely feels like Coda, if he's a real character, is in the real world, is dead, and maybe that would be why there isn't any lawsuit happening there. But it also seems like it would be hard at this point to continue down the thought that the Coda and the narrator are the same person. Not impossible, it's still somewhat believable, but the idea that you violated your own privacy is a hard concept to wrap your head around. Anyways, these episodes are getting longer and longer, so let's end it here. And I guess it was laughable when we were back at chapter 12 and I thought that was going to be the last episode. Again, I feel like we might have one more episode, but who knows at this point. It could just keep on going. That's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a whole bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and gift me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.